You're listening to continuing coverage in the Las Vegas reporter murder trial of Robert Tellez from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. Now, back to the courtroom.
Are there any injuries here that you noted?
Yes, there are 2 stab wounds to the posterior neck.
Okay. Could you circle where those are?
Sure. We have one here and one here.
All right. Publishing 192. What are we looking at here?
Again, this is the posterior or back portion of the body, and we have 2 stab wounds as well. Here and then here as well.
So that last one you just circled, is that the left posterior one that you were describing that hits I'm going to butcher that. I want to look at my notes. The hemidiaphragm as well as the hilum.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the one you were talking about previously.
Correct.
Okay. This superior one up here, what was the wound track on that?
Again, involves the skin and subcutaneous top tissues.
Okay, and then I'm just re-showing 193. These 2 up here, what sort of damage did that create?
Both are going to involve the skin and subcutaneous soft tissues.
All right. Publishing 194. Is this the right side? Is this the right side of Mr. Gehrman's body?
Yes.
And what do we see on the right side that was of note for your investigation or your examination of Mr. Gehrman?
So here in the center of the photograph, there is a linear abrasion, which is like a scrape or scratch-like injury.
Okay. I want to now focus on Mr. Gehrman's hands. I want to focus on the right hand. What did you note with respect to his right hand and his right forearm?
There were multiple, approximately 3 incised wounds to the right hand and forearm.
Publishing 201. Could you circle where you see any potential, or where you see injuries on Mr. Gehrman's hand?
Yes. So there's one here. I believe there's one here as well. It's slightly overexposed to me.
Let's see if I can bring the darkness down. But you're noting here and here, is that correct?
Correct.
And for the record, there seems to be kind of near the right index finger a laceration, and she's also noting an injury to the inside of his right thumb near the base. Have you ever heard the term defensive type injuries or defensive wounds?
Yes.
In your line of work, what does that mean?
They're wounds that characteristically are seen when a victim is attempting to either defend themselves actively or passively.
Did you make a determination based on your training and experience that these wounds here were most likely representative of a defensive type injury?
Yes, they could be consistent with defensive type wounds.
Publishing 202, we're now looking at his right forearm. Is there an injury noted here?
Yes.
Could you circle it?
There's a small incised wound here in the middle of the photograph.
Okay. Publishing 203, is this a more close-up view of that same injury?
Yes.
In your opinion, was this also consistent with a defensive wound?
It could be.
Turning to his left hand and forearm, did you also note injuries on his left hand and his left forearm?
Yes.
Okay. Publishing 199, could you show us where any injuries are depicted in that photograph?
There is an incised wound here on the dorsal aspect of the thumb.
Okay, is that dorsal mean top?
Yes.
Okay. And publishing 200. What did you note here?
And then, again, there is an incised wound to the forearm.
Okay. Could you circle it for us?
Yes.
All right. In your opinion, based on your training experience, did you also make a determination that these injuries to the left forearm and to the left hand are also consistent with defensive type wounds?
Yes, they could be.
Lastly, did you make a series of notations about a variety of other bruises or contusions or potentially even smaller lacerations throughout Mr. Dermott's body?
Yes.
And then publishing 188, do we see some of those in this photograph?
Yes.
And generally, where are these injuries?
So scattered predominantly across the forehead are some minor abrasions, or again, these scrape or scratch-like injuries.
If you could, just take your mouse and just show us what you're speaking about.
Etc.
Okay. When you've concluded your examination, did you reach a determination as to what the cause and manner of death was with respect to Jeffrey Gehrman?
Yes.
And what was the cause of death?
Multiple sharp force injuries.
And what was the manner of death?
Homicide.
And in lay terms, what does homicide mean?
Homicide means death at the hands of another.
Thank you. I have no further questions to the case. Yes, thank you.
Doctor, how many stab wounds were on the body?
Sorry, I have to do some math in my head. I believe there are 6 stab wounds.
And how many slicing wounds, slashing wounds?
7 incised wounds.
Okay, so we have 6 and 7, 13.
Yes.
You had given testimony concerning what appeared to be a slashing wound to the front of the neck, correct?
Incised wound, yes.
And I'm referring specifically to State's Exhibit 189. I'm sorry. That would be the wound right here, correct?
Correct.
You would testify that that would have severed the carotid artery, correct?
It did sever the carotid artery, yes.
It did.
Yes.
And you would testify that that would be the primary source, the main source of blood to the brain.
Correct.
Safe to say that in so doing, having been severed, that would have admitted a substantial amount of blood.
It could have, yes.
Through your examination of the body, were you able to determine whether this wound had occurred in a standing position, a laying position?
No.
But assuming that it would have been a decisive wound or a primary cause of death wound, it would be safe to assume that Mr. Gehrman was standing. Fair to say?
I would not assume that, no.
No. So it's your testimony then that he could have basically received a fatal cut and gotten back up or been down. You're unaware as to the order. Fair to say?
Correct.
Of the 13 wounds suffered, would it be your characterization that this would be the most serious?
It is one of the more significant wounds, yes.
The other wound being to the left side of the body,
Yes.
near the heart,
Yes.
and that would have been the second most grievous, or the second most serious wound that Mr. Gehrman would have suffered, correct?
I would say that it is another significant wound, yes.
And is it also fair to say that given the location of the wound and the type of the wound, again, that would have emitted a great deal of blood?
Can you be more specific about where?
Would you expect that cut to bleed, that stab wound to bleed?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially. Would you expect it not to bleed?
There are certain circumstances, yes, where a lot of blood might not be produced.
And what would those circumstances be?
So bleeding could be externally or internally. So I guess we would have to delineate which one you're asking about.
You obviously performed the autopsy in this case. Did you see any signs of internal bleeding?
Yes,
And how significant was the internal bleeding?
there was a small amount of blood.
A small amount. So then it would be safe to assume that the bleeding was exterior. I mean, it would have left the body, correct?
It could have.
Okay. It would be, for a person to bleed a fair amount from this wound, would be consistent with the wound received. I mean, you have no reason to believe that it didn't bleed a fair amount.
Correct.
Same question concerning the wound to the neck. I mean, it's safe to assume that would have bled a lot because there were no signs of internal bleeding concerning that wound, correct?
There were signs of internal bleeding.
But a small amount versus a large amount.
At the time of the autopsy, correct.
Okay. So again, we'd have small internal bleeding, not major internal bleeding as to the two major wounds that occurred, correct?
At the time of the autopsy, yes.
Based upon your examination of the body, specifically the incised wounds, are you able to give an opinion as to the type of murder weapon or the weapon that caused these wounds?
No, other than sharp force injury, which would be due to a tool or implement with a sharp cutting edge, no.
Were any wounds particularly deep? What were the depth of it? And let's focus on the, outside of the defensive wounds, which obviously wouldn't give you an indication, but the two primary wounds.
The deepest wound, I believe, was measured at approximately 3 inches in depth.
3. And as far as the instrument, you can't give any opinion. Jagged edge, straight edge, anything of that nature.
Correct.
Safe to say that the instrument was not longer, assuming it was a knife blade, longer than 3 inches, based upon your examination of the body.
Could you ask the question again, please?
Absolutely. Safe to assume that based upon your examination of the body, and assuming this was a knife wound, safe to say that the blade of the knife would have not been longer than 3 inches.
It is not safe to assume that.
And please explain why.
So the depth of the wound does not directly correlate to the length of the blade. Someone can use full force, push a blade directly all the way to its hilt into a decedent, therefore creating a depth longer than the actual blade. Or the blade could not be pushed in fully, which would then create a wound that is not as long as the full length of the blade.
And in this case, would there be any indication, assuming the knife had been pushed in, that it was not able to be pushed in completely? Anything would have blocked its path or the trajectory?
Could you repeat the question again?
Absolutely. Nothing to show that, let's say, a person was attempting to stab into the body. Is there anything to show or that would have stopped, let's say, the intrusion of the blade?
I don't have any evidence of that on autopsy examination.
And again, you gave testimony that perhaps the blade could have been shorter, but then made a deeper intrusion.
It's possible.
In this case, there's nothing to indicate that, based upon your review of the body.
Correct.
So, based upon your review and your examination, 3-inch wound is the deepest, fair to say?
Correct.
Nothing to indicate that it could have, that, assuming it was a blade, could have been longer, correct?
It could have, yes.
But at the time of the autopsy, are you aware of any other examinations that may have occurred to the body prior to your examination?
Correct.
You're not aware of any, are you?
No.
So obviously then we're basically limited to your examination of the body and the conclusion reached by your examination of the body.
Yes.
And at the time of your examination of the body, there was little internal bleeding. Fair to say?
Yes.
So it's fair to assume that the bleeding, again, would not have been internal, it would have been external bleeding. I mean, the bleeding caused by these wounds inflicted.
It is one possibility, yes.
At what time did you conduct your examination of the body?
I don't recall.
Do you recall the date?
It would be September 4th, 2022.
And who was present when you examined the body?
Along with the forensic technicians that are part of my staff, there's a member of law enforcement present as well.
And do you recall who that was?
I believe it was Detective Hawkins.
Okay. Mr. Hamner had asked you concerning the hands. You recall, the body coming in a sealed bag, and there was a question concerning the processing of the nails. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
It was your testimony that you did not recall the nails being processed upon your review of the body.
Correct. The clipping of fingernails is not something that is within my job duties. Our forensic technicians perform that task.
Okay.
And I believe that those are given then to Metro or law enforcement.
And when you viewed the body, obviously the hands were not bagged, correct?
Correct.
And you did not remove any bagging from the hands?
Me personally, no.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Direct.
So just to touch on that clippings question, so that's a process that essentially happens before you kind of take over to do your examination. That be correct?
Correct.
Okay. There were questions about the number of wounds and injuries. One of the things I wanted to touch on, I'm going to publish 189. Does he appear to be in a state of decomposition?
Yes.
Okay. Is that why we see some skin slippage and things of that nature?
Yes.
Okay. That was just something that wasn't covered. I wanted to at least address that. Can that be affected by sitting out in the hot sun?
Yes.
Okay, and this was September. This is in early September. I think it was done on, yours was done on the 4th. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. There were questions on cross-examination about the fact that there were, I think you were asked to count up the number of injuries. Remember that? I think you came up with 13.
Yes.
Okay. But to be clear, one of the injuries literally is a slashing of his throat, correct?
An incised wound of the neck, yes.
Okay. Which could be performed with a slashing motion, potentially, correct?
Potentially.
Okay. But let's be honest, that injury literally severs his carotid artery.
Yes.
Okay. There is literally a stab wound that pierces his heart.
Correct.
And then there's multiple stab wounds to his back, correct?
Correct.
There's stab wounds to his side, on both sides, or at least there's lacerations on one side and stabs on the other, correct?
There's an abrasion on the right side and 2 stab wounds on the left.
Okay. So there's multiple stabs, and then there's multiple cuts, incisions throughout his body.
There are multiple incisions on the upper extremities, yes.
And then there was one other question about how he was asking you about, well, trying to estimate the length of a blade, right? And I think you had said that's not the length of a wound is not really a good measurement to determine the length of the blade because certain circumstances can be at play that can affect the depth of the injury, correct?
Correct.
And one of the things I think you said was sometimes a blade may not go all the way in. Is that correct?
Correct.
Isn't it true that one of the things you noted was, well, then let me rephrase. You examined his hands, correct?
Yes.
His hands have injuries on them, do they not?
Yes.
And in your opinion, what type of wounds are those characteristic of?
They could be consistent with defensive type injuries.
And that is where a victim is trying to protect himself from being injured.
That is one instance, yes.
And this individual is being stabbed multiple times.
Yes.
And he had injuries to his hands as he was being attacked.
There are injuries to his hands.
Okay, no further questions.
Any class?
Just briefly, in reference to the incised wounds, the stab wounds, length of the blade, if it was in fact a blade. Again, there was no bruising around the entry point of the wound to indicate perhaps something being stopped, like say the hilt of a knife, assuming it was a knife. Fair to say?
I did not identify any bruising around the areas of the stab wounds. Evaluation was limited slightly by the stages of decomposition of the body.
Obviously, if you had a body and there were multiple stab wounds and you saw multiple bruising type injuries, that would indicate obviously there was a stopping point, correct?
It could be consistent with something else hitting that area.
Okay. The hilt of a knife, perhaps.
Could be, yes.
And in this case, the deepest wound was a 3-inch stab wound, correct?
It was measured at approximately 3 inches, yes.
Could have been a little less.
Yes.
You gave an example wherein a shorter blade could have been used, and based upon your testimony, a shorter blade could have been used in this case.
Yes.
Again, the cut to the neck, we would expect that to bleed substantially.
It would be my expectation, yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything else?
Nothing further.
Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony here today. You may step down and you're excused from your subpoena. Thank you for being here. You may call your next witness.
Jennifer Manning.
Please step up to the witness stand. You'll remain standing. Raise your right hand, please.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
First name Jennifer, Jennifer. Last name Manning, Manning.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Thank you. How are you employed?
As a senior crime scene analyst with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department.
And we've had a couple crime scene analysts testify ahead of you, but can you give us your explanation of what a crime scene analyst does?
Sure. At first, we're requested to crime scenes by patrol officers or detectives, and our primary responsibility is for the documentation of that scene, which would entail detailed note-taking of the scene, photography, identification, location, and preservation of any evidence that we find. If there's anything to fingerprint process, we will process that. In major cases, we'll complete a diagram. And at the end of everything, reports are completed and turned in.
Okay. And you're a senior crime scene analyst?
Yes.
And we've heard testimony before that you have to have a certain amount of experience and proficiency in order to be a senior crime scene analyst?
Yes.
Do crime scene analysts attend autopsies?
Yes, we do.
What is the role of a crime scene analyst at autopsy?
So autopsy is really an extension of the original crime scene. It'll give us an opportunity to search for and collect any additional evidence that might be present.
Okay. On September the 4th of 2022, did you attend the autopsy of Jeff Gehrman?
Yes, I did.
Let me ask you, the crime scene or the body of Mr. Gehrman was discovered at his home on September the 3rd. Did you report to that scene at all?
No, I did not.
How was it that you came to be the person that reported on the 4th for his autopsy?
We have a rotation of crime scene analysts who can actually go to autopsies, and I was next up on the rotation.
Is it just kind of random?
Yes.
Okay. When you're the person assigned to go to an autopsy, I assume you go into work that day, and that's when you learn that you're going to be the person going to the autopsy?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And once you realize you have that assignment, what do you do in order to prepare to attend the autopsy?
Well, when we get down to the coroner's office, we will log our visitation for that day, and for me it was autopsy that day. We do have lockers down there that are designated for LVMPD personnel that houses our PPE. So I would get gowned up in all the personal protective equipment prior to entering into the ID processing room.
Okay. And I assume at the coroner's office, you can't just walk in and say, you know, I'm here and I'd like to attend an autopsy. They have to let you in?
Yes.
Okay. And you said PPE, and I think we all probably know what that is. But can you describe what you wear for an autopsy?
Yes, I always wear a hairnet, mask. I wear a gown. It covers over 3/4 of my body. Booties over my shoes, in addition to gloves.
Okay. And when you get all, as you said, gowned up, what's the next thing that happens at an autopsy for a crime scene analyst?
So when we enter the processing room, I'll get all my supplies ready for the collection of the evidence that may happen during the autopsy.
Okay. And what are those supplies, just generally?
So I'll do an envelope for the handbags. I'll get a larger bag ready for like the sheet, kind of like this size of bag. I will get little coin envelopes ready for fingernail clippings, swabs ready to do any sort of swabs.
And are there standard samples that Metro takes from an individual as they present at autopsy? Like standard evidence samples, I guess, from their body?
Yes, we always, well, I shouldn't say always, but typically, given the case, there's handbags on there, so we'll collect the handbags. We will do hand swabs. We'll collect fingernails. We also will take a buccal swab, which is a DNA sample.
Okay. And are you working with the coroner's office forensic techs in order to kind of get your evidence, and they're doing their job as well?
Yes.
And are you both separately taking photographs?
Yes, we are.
Prior to you showing up at the autopsy, do you know what forensic tech you're going to be working with for the autopsy?
No, I don't.
Okay, so that's random too?
Yes.
Okay. When the body first presents at autopsy, do you take any note as to whether or not the seal of the body bag is intact?
Yes, I do.
And that's part of your responsibilities with Metro?
That is correct. So my first photography, my first photo of it would be to show the body bag and then to show that the seal is intact.
Okay. And then after, I assume the seal's broken, and that's when the processing starts?
Yes.
And then that's when you're working with the forensic techs?
Yes.
And can you kind of describe how that, like if we were watching, what would that look like?
So after the seal is cut, the forensic technician will open up the body bag. We'll take a series of photos to show the condition of what we see.
The condition of the person?
Yes.
Okay. When you were at this autopsy for Mr. Gehrman, did you notice any defects or any damage to the handbags or the bags that were on his hands or anything like that?
No, I did not.
Okay. And no problem, you didn't see any defects or signs that the body bag itself had been compromised?
That is correct.
Okay. So I assume you're taking photographs of this first step that you described?
Yes.
Okay. And then we've heard testimony that it's kind of done in layers. Is that a fair description?
Yes.
Okay. And so the first layer is just, I assume, how the person presents with their clothes on as is, or however they appeared at the scene?
Yes.
What's after that?
So after that is when we'll do the collection of the handbags, the swabs of the hands, the fingernail clippings.
And when you do the swabs of the hands, can you describe for the members of the jury what you're using to swab the hands and what area of the hand that you swab?
So it's a cotton swab that is in a sealed package. I would put 2 drops of molecular water on there, and then I would swab all around the fingers, the palm, around the nails, and the web of the hand.
Okay. And this is probably obvious, but I assume that the swabs are new for each autopsy, like everything's fresh equipment.
Yes.
And you swab all over all areas of the hands?
Yes.
And then I think you mentioned that fingernail clippings are collected as well?
Yes.
What does that look like? How do you collect those at an autopsy working with the forensic techs?
So the forensic technician will clean and disinfect a pair of scissors, and I'll be right there with them with a little coin envelope. And for him to, after he cuts each fingernail, it will go inside the coin envelope. I do one for the right hand and a separate one for the left hand.
Okay. And so it just goes right from sort of being clipped off the person into your envelope?
Yes.
And you actually are the person that observes them disinfect or clean the scissors that are going to be used?
Yes.
Okay. And then when you collect those envelopes of the fingernail clippings, what do you do with those?
I close that up and then I put it into a little bit larger envelope that we call a biological envelope, and I seal those.
Okay, and that's indicating that the substance inside the evidence bag is biological?
Yes.
Okay. What do you do with clothing of a decedent at autopsy?
So the coroner's office has clean sheets, so I will lay out a clean sheet. That's part of the one prepping process. And then after I get the buccal swab, then we will lay out the clothing.
In this case with Mr. Gehrman's clothing, how would you describe it? Was it dry or wet, or what did it look like to you?
It was saturated with blood and had a little bit of decomp fluid on it.
So decomposition fluid and blood on it as well?
Yes.
When you have clothing like that, how as a crime scene analyst do you address that in terms of impounding it as evidence?
So we have biohazard drying closets back in the crime scene investigation section. So I would hang up the clothing and the sheet to dry. So typically will take 1 to 2 days to dry.
Okay. So in terms of the samples of like the hand swabs and the fingernail clippings, after you collect those from autopsy, I think you said they're in small envelopes, then in a larger envelope, and then are they in an evidence bag after that, or an evidence envelope?
Yes.
What do you do with that envelope in terms of ensuring that it's not compromised?
I would put in a red evidence seal on the back of the package. I would sign it the date that I am sealing it, and then my initials and P number.
Okay, and then where does that go?
We have a log, so we will log it back at the CSI section, and then we have a secure chute that we'll drop our evidence down into.
So once you drop that evidence down that chute, are you able, or is anybody able to grab that piece of evidence back up?
Supervisor and above would have access to the room.
Okay. And would they have to sign something saying, hey, I recalled an evidence envelope?
Yes.
Okay. Did you, after you dropped those swabs and fingernail clippings down that evidence chute, did you ever have contact with that evidence again?
No.
And as you left that envelope, it was sealed?
Yes.
Okay. His clothing that you talked about that was in the, I think you called drying closets?
Yes.
What happened with that?
I was able to seal that up 2 days later.
Okay, so that would have been on the 6th?
Yes.
Okay. And to be clear, the autopsy was on the 4th, and so the swabs of the hands and the fingernail clippings would have been deposited into that evidence chute on the 4th?
That is correct.
And no contact with that after?
Correct.
And then you waited for the clothes to be dried, and then that was deposited on the 6th?
Yes.
Okay. Well, may I approach the witness, Your Honor? And I've shown these photographs just for the record to Mr. Droskovich. So Ms. Manning, I'm showing you what's been marked as state's proposed 162 to 176. Could you look through those and just let me know when you're done, please?
Okay.
Looking through those, do those appear to be just a portion of the photos that you took at the autopsy of Mr. Gehrman and some of his clothing?
Yes.
State moves to admit 162 to 176.
No objection.
And then while I'm up here, I'm going to have you look at state's proposed 177 through 187. Do those appear to be photographs that you took of the defendant on September 7th of 2022?
Yes.
I move to admit 177 to 187.
No objection.
May I publish these, Your Honor? Thank you. Ms. Manning, I'm putting on the overhead what's been admitted as state's 162. Looking at that photograph, can you describe to the members of the jury what we're looking at?
That is the decedent's right arm.
Okay, and it would have been obviously that hand, or well, you actually did it for both hands, that the fingernail clippings and hand swabs were taken?
Yes.
Both hands? This is States 163, which is just sort of a closer version, is that correct?
That is correct.
And now I'm putting on the overhead States 165. That also appears to be the decedent's hand?
Yes.
And to be clear, it's the technician who actually, with the scissors, who actually cuts the fingernails, and then you hold your envelope waiting for it to drop in?
That is correct.
And that procedure was followed in the autopsy of Mr. Gehrman?
Yes.
I'm going to put on the overhead now, States 166. What are we looking at in that photograph?
So this is the sheet that I was referring to, and then the clothing that was removed from the decedent.
Okay, and the sheet is in the upper left kind of corner of the sheet of the photograph?
Yes, that is the sheet that was wrapped around the decedent.
Okay, and then that's the clothing he was wearing?
Yes.
I'm putting on the overhead now, States 167. What are we looking at there?
That is the shorts that were removed from the decedent.
And it looks like there's some car keys there, or keys, is that correct?
That is correct. There were keys in the right pocket.
Okay, and you photographed that as it presents to you when you're attending the autopsy?
Yes.
I'm now putting on the overhead States 169. What are we looking at there?
That is the shirt that the decedent was wearing.
And now I'm showing you States 171. It still appears to be the shirt, but there are these yellow kind of markers on it. What are those?
Those are scaled arrows that we will put on an item to mark the potential areas for defects.
And by defects, it's something in the fabric like hole or something like that?
That is correct.
I'm putting on the overhead now, this is probably a better one, States 173. Does that appear to be a closer view of one of those markers and a defect?
Yes.
And so by those markers, you're trying to draw the viewer's attention to where there's something in the clothing that may be noteworthy, right?
That is correct.
You also collected Mr. Gehrman's shoes?
Yes.
I'm putting on the overhead now, States 175. Do those appear to be the shoes?
They are.
Okay. And States 176 appear to be the backs of his shoes?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, after we talked about all of the evidence you impounded at autopsy, and I think you mentioned this, but I just want to double check. At autopsy, you also took a buccal swab of Mr. Gehrman?
Yes, I did.
And I assume that was to collect a DNA sample from him?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, I want to move forward in time to September 7th. On that date, were you asked to go to the Summerlin Area Command to take pictures of an individual?
Yes, I was.
And is that person Robert Tellis?
Yes.
You took a series of photos of him at the direction of Detective Gaddis?
Yes.
I'm putting on the overhead now, States 177. Is that one of the photographs you took of Mr. Tellis on September 7th?
Yes.
And when you were documenting his physical condition, do you have him like turn to the right, so you can get different aspects of his body?
Yes, we will take full body shots, the front, both sides, and the back.
Okay. And this is States 178, just another view, but more sideways?
That is correct.
States 179, the back of him.
That is correct.
And States 180. When you were photographing him, was one of the purposes of photographing him to note any potential injuries that he had on his person?
Yes.
Do you recall if there were any injuries to him?
There were a couple of injuries. He had a Band-Aid on the left ring finger, an injury on the left middle finger, an injury on the right ring finger, and a bruise on the right shoulder.
I'm putting on the overhead now, states 182. You said he had a Band-Aid on his left ring finger.
Yes.
Do you see that in the photograph?
Yes, I do.
Can you move that mouse in front of you and just kind of direct the jurors? Did you ask him or did you direct him to remove that Band-Aid?
Yes.
This is states 184, and that's the hand with the Band-Aid removed.
That is correct.
And this is states 186. A closer view, is that fair?
Yes, with our scale in there.
Okay. Were you also on September the 7th, did you also collect a buccal swab from Mr. Tellis?
Yes, I did.
And I'm not sure if we covered this, but what does a buccal swab look like?
So it's a self-contained kit. Inside the kit has 2 sealed cotton swabs. So you would take those out and swab one side of the cheek with one cotton swab and swab the other side of the cheek with another cotton swab. And then there's a little box that you would put the cotton swabs into. And after you do that, then you would seal up the kit.
So once you got his buccal swab on September the 7th, did you have specific instructions on what to do with it?
I was to respond back to the crime scene investigation section to get those impounded.
Okay, and was there any like sense of urgency or to do it quicker than normal, or you just were driving straight back? You would have done that anyway, or you tell me.
Yes, I was advised to head back to the CSI section.
Okay, as soon as you got the buccal swab?
Yes.
Okay, and you did that, I assume?
Yes.
And that was, none of the evidence or his buccal swab wasn't compromised from the Summerlin Area Command to where you ultimately impounded it?
No.
Thank you very much. I'll pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Manning, you were asked to bring that bag with you to court today, correct?
Correct.
And if you could inform us what's contained within that bag.
So inside this bag is a pair of jeans that I recovered from the defendant.
Okay. You brought that from the evidence vault today?
Yes.
I would ask her to lodge that with the court. Defense Exhibit A would be great. Thank you.
Defendant's Exhibit A.
Do you want to have her open it now? Or?
She wanted it open?
We intend addressing that later. I mean, by stipulation, we could, or state's pleasure. Absolutely. Since she's here, we'll take advantage. We could have her open it now, please.
Okay, all right.
Do you have a bag as well to bag it? Miss Manning, do you have a bag as well to bag it?
I do not.
Okay.
Please, yes.
The jeans along with the belt will be A2.
You want me to hold them up? Okay.
Thank you. If we could have a lodge up with the court.
No objection.
So are you admitting?
Yes, please. We'd move to admit by stipulated, yes.
They're on the table.
Mr. Gross, did you need these anymore?
Today we don't.
Okay.
No, thank you very much. Now, you photographed these pants, correct?
Yes, I did.
You were aware that those pants were taken from Mr. Tellez, correct?
Yes,
And they were taken pursuant to a warrant? to
that
your
is
knowledge.
correct.
Did you process those pants?
No, I did not.
I see. Turning your attention to the photographs shown of you of Mr. Tellez. We'll start with State's Exhibit 177. You took the photograph, correct?
Yes, I did.
You noticed no injuries to his, other than the one near his ring finger, any injuries to his arms, neck, anything like that, his face?
Not in this photo, just
Okay.
the ones on his hands.
And we were shown those just moments ago, correct?
Correct.
Same question, State's Exhibit 178.
That is correct. No injuries.
State's Exhibit 179.
The same.
State's Exhibit 180. Same question, no injuries, neck, arms, anything like that.
Correct.
And State's Exhibit 181.
The same.
Now, in this photograph, his shirt's off, correct?
That is correct.
And you took photographs of his shirt off as well, did you not?
I did.
But you've not been asked any testimony concerning those photographs today, have you?
No, I have not.
Do you recall what photographs, how many photographs you took of his bare torso, front and back? The rest of his body?
I do not.
You took several.
I
fair
did
to
take
say?
several, yes.
If we could approach the bench, please.
Sure.
Yeah, that's fine. Fair to say there were photographs taken of his body, correct?
That is correct.
That you then made available to the primary detective in this case?
Yes.
Okay, we'll get to those later on then. But you agree with me that you didn't see any scratch marks, any wounds?
Just the bruise on the right shoulder.
Okay, and again, we'll have a photograph of that we don't have today, but it was a minor bruise, correct?
Correct.
Unable to say what time that bruise may or may not have occurred, correct?
That is correct.
No, so I'm clear, you were present for the processing of Mr. Gehrman, correct?
Yes.
And yet you were also present during the gathering of evidence for Mr. Tellez.
Yes.
There's a number of people that are in this rotation that you had made reference to that you just happened to appear for, correct? Concerning the investigation of this matter.
Yes, that is correct.
Yet you, being a crime scene investigator, were present in reference to both gentlemen, correct?
Correct.
How many total photographs did you take of Mr. Tellez?
I do not recall.
Do you recall when these photographs were taken?
They were taking, I arrived at 8:25, so after that time.
In reference to the bagging of the hands, I'm sorry, the collection of the fingernails of Mr. Gehrman, approximately what time did that occur?
The bag was cut, the seal was cut at 7:25, and I was done with autopsy at 10:50, so sometime in there. You'd have to look up the metadata on the photograph.
You were not present at Mr. Gehrman's home, correct?
No, I was not.
You're not aware of who was, fair to say?
I know some members of my other squad.
Okay, but you're not able to tell us today, correct?
Was that for the search warrant?
Correct.
Stephanie Smithson was there, my supervisor, Moretta McIntyre, director, Kristen Gramis.
And that was at the execution of the warrant, correct?
That is correct.
Concerning Mr. Tellis, correct?
Yes.
And you'd also testified that once this evidence is put down through the chute, that supervisors have access to the evidence, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
She's gonna have to sign.
Wait on, Ms. Manning, if you can wait on break so we can sign over chain of custody.
Okay, you'll just take a break now. At this time, we're going to take a recess. During this recess, you're admonished not to discuss or communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, in any way regarding the case or its merits, either by voice, phone, email, text, internet, or the means of communication or social media. Read, watch, or listen to the news or media accounts or commentary about the case. Do research, consult dictionaries, internet, or reference materials. Do any investigation, test a theory, recreate any aspect of the case, or in any other way investigate or learn about the case on your own, or form or express any opinion regarding the case until it's finally submitted to you. We'll be in recess for 15 minutes.
Thank you. All rise for the next adjournment, please. Jurors.
Haley just had to have.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. Please remain seated and come to order. Court is now back in session.
Does the state stipulate to the presence of the jury panel?
Yes, Your Honor.
And the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, the state may call their next witness.
Thank you. The state's going to call Zach Schilling, please.
I'm sorry, Zach.
Zach Schilling.
Zach Dillon. Please watch your step. If you'll remain standing, raise your right hand, face clerk.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Zachary Schilling, Zackary, Schilling, Schilling.
May I proceed? Thank you. Sir, do you know someone by the name of Robert Tellis?
I do.
When did you first meet Mr. Tellis?
2020.
Okay. Do you see Mr. Tellis here in the courtroom?
I do.
Why don't you point out where he's sitting, maybe describe an article of clothing that he's wearing?
He's got a blue suit on, sitting right over there, bald head.
Okay, let the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant. So in what context do you meet the defendant?
2020, I'm a real estate agent,
Okay.
and I started working with Robert shortly after I believe he was elected to his position, helping to sell probate houses.
Okay, so he was the public administrator when you first met him.
Yes.
Do you have a business partner?
Yes, I do.
What is her name?
His name, Bob McMasters.
Okay, did
And
you have
that's-
another partner that you worked with?
Oh, yeah, Kristen Riffle. That's my real partner, yeah.
Okay, so that was
Well, I guess when you asked me that, that's how I met Bob, through Bob.
okay, but the one that you work with even still today is Kristen, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so you would help sell homes through the public administrator, is that right?
That is correct.
Just briefly, what's that kind of concept? So someone passes away and they don't have a will, and then there's a home left behind, is that kind of how
That's
you get
correct,
involved?
and there's typically, there's not a family per se, or the family's distant. That's when the public administration office steps in and helps with the estate.
Okay, so if you were tasked to help the public administrator's office help, I don't know, get a home fixed up or resell it, would you have interactions with Mr. Tellis?
Yes,
Would you see him in person?
yes.
Describe typically something you might do in person with Mr. Tellis.
Well, typically, we would, when the house was assigned, we'd walk through the house and say, this is what needs to be taken care of, this is what we're getting rid of. And then typically after the house was finished and completed, we would meet, look at the house. Rob would give us a thumbs up. We then would go over comps. During that process, we would talk about the value, and typically then the listing agreement would be signed either in person or through DocuSign.
So when you're saying you would do a walkthrough, who would typically be there at a walkthrough?
Typically, it would be myself, Robert Tellis, Roberta, Bob McMasters, and Raul, who was the general contractor, who wasn't a general contractor.
And Roberta, meaning Roberta Kennett?
Yes.
All right. So when you would do a
Well,
walkthrough,
but if I may,
Sure.
if there was another somebody in the same position as Roberta, would
Okay.
be whoever was in charge of the file under Robert would be there.
understood. But when you say walkthrough, you're literally walking through with Mr. Tellis?
That's correct.
So you get to see him literally walk.
Yes.
How long would a walkthrough typically take?
We could be there a half hour to an hour, or sometimes he could be in and out of there in 10, 15 minutes.
All right. On average, how many times a month would you be doing walkthroughs with Mr. Tellis?
Well, I would say that on average from 2020 to 2022, I'd see Mr. Tellis probably 1 to 3 times a month at least.
Okay, doing things like you've just
Yeah.
described to us.
Yeah, especially during the heat of it, yes.
And the heat of being what? COVID?
Heat of when we were really turning houses for him.
Understood. And you mentioned 2020 to 2022, is that right?
Yes.
It's about 3 years, roughly,
Two-
or a little,
yeah.
a little over 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. At some point and I want to turn your attention to September, very early September of 2022. Do you become aware of a journalist, Jeff Gehrman, passing away?
Yes.
I don't want to get into the substance of it, but like, how do you learn about it in general?
I saw how I learned that he died was, a picture on the news. Then shortly after that, I think there was police video or police photos that were released of the suspected person that had done that.
Okay, so bottom line is, at first you see through the news it's just kind of reporting what happened. It was a fairly big story. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Okay, at least locally,
Yes.
it's a big story. And then you mentioned something else. You said that the police released what?
The police released photos of who they suspected perhaps might be the person responsible for.
Do you remember kind of generally like what the outfit was? What do you remember?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So what do you remember?
It was a sombrero, a flame construction vest, I think long sleeve shirt. The shoes were some Nikes.
Okay.
The Nikes like you find like at Marshalls or Ross.
Okay. So you mentioned those Nikes. So when you see those images first released of the suspect walking around, does that catch your attention?
Yes,
Why?
it does. With the way that, I mean, just in the photos itself, and the likeliness of the photos and of Mr. Tellis were really, really close.
Is it just photos, or is there a video that you've seen this person walk? In the videos released by the police, did you see the videos too?
Yes.
So you see this suspect walking. What are you thinking at that point?
That was on a Friday.
Okay.
And I'm like, boy, that really, it's like, boy, that really looks like somebody I know.
Okay, and who is the person you're thinking of?
I was thinking of Mr. Tellis.
Okay, was there anything else aside from the walk that caught your attention? When you looked at the videos of that person.
The gait and Mr. Tellis would always wear a certain kind of Nike that was very unique to me.
Okay, so
maybe I'm a little bit fashionista, but like the Nikes that you would find like at Marshalls or Ross, where they replaced the leather with like a plastic almost, and the hard plastic. They're cheap Nikes you always wore. I don't know.
So when you saw the video, the guys you described in the sombrero and the construction and the orange construction outfit, you thought the shoes reminded you of the shoes that Robert Tellis wore.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And the gait.
Yeah, and the way that he walked, the way that he carried, the way that it was carried.
So when you see this, do you like share these thoughts with anyone?
Well, with my partner Christy, I'm like, holy crap! Both of us agreed that really looked like Rob Tellis. But to jump to a conclusion like that about somebody, you have to be pretty sure of yourself.
And let me ask you this. Did you kind of follow or know about any articles that Mr. Gehrman had written about Mr. Tellis?
Oh, yeah, I was very familiar.
I don't want to get into the substance of it, but you were aware of kind of that leading up to this moment?
Yeah, I was very familiar with what was going on.
Okay. So, on that Friday, you see that, you talk to Kristen. Do you pick up the phone and call the police at that point?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So, I want to flash forward a few days later. Do you see something else in the media that catches your attention?
Yeah, I was on Monday. The Reno Gazette released photos of who, again, they believed was responsible for Mr. Gehrman's death's car.
Okay, a car. What is it about the car that caught your attention?
More continuing coverage in the Las Vegas reporter murder trial of Robert Tellis is on the way. From the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today, press subscribe now.